Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I am super excited about this episode today because we are streaming live from the underground bunker at Kourtney's house in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. Is that correct? Yeah. So we are going to go live for just a few minutes here for an update, and then we are going to record the podcast and have it ready later for viewing on all of our forums on my personal Facebook page, LinkedIn, Twitter, and the Mosley Professional Pharmacy YouTube site. So go to those places also to watch this and subscribe and comment. We really would appreciate it. Today, what we are going to go over is my hair mineral analysis. I've never done one of these before. I've heard about them for years. You know, being in functional medicine, we've heard about them for years. I've just never done one myself. So Janet was kind enough to shave the back of my head.
Good job.
I think
there's no empty spots.
That's not the first time she's done that, actually. That's a whole other story. And so now we have the results, and Dr. Kourtney is going to go over those results. So I'm super excited to go over with him. There's some surprises on there for me. And hopefully you guys will learn something today about how to make yourselves work your way to optimal health, because that's what we're all about here on Health Solutions. And so stay tuned for the updated episode, the finished episode, right here on all these channels. So thank you for tuning in, and we really appreciate you guys. Okay, we are here with Dr. Kourtney Powers. Hello.
Hi.
And we are going to be going over my what do they call it? Trace hair mineral analysis?
Yes.
Tell us.
Trace mineral hair analysis. Trace Elements is the name of the company, but it's a hair tissue mineral analysis. So it's basically what the minerals are doing in the soft tissue of your body, sometimes when they're in other places when they should be in bones or other places. And this test is not really a diagnostic test, but it shows things that could potentially be happening in the body, and we look at ways that we can fix them by either taking other minerals to create a balance, or even supplementation and even digestion aid, because sometimes you'll be surprised with what I came up with when I looked at the results. Is some of it looks like it's digestion to me. Some of it looks like you might not be absorbing everything properly. And then there are a couple things that are on the elevated level, which are things that, like usually when I'm doing it with a patient, I will collect a full health history, which we did not with you. We just did this. So you might have some interesting things to tell me as we go.
Yeah, possibly. So I ask you questions. So a little bit of the background. We'll also put links in the show notes to the results of my test and the how to find out more information about Trace Elements. It was a pretty simple process. Janet just took some and cut my hair. She really loved doing that. And they make it pretty simple. And then you send it off. They have everything in a package. You send it off, and then they send you the results. So pretty simple. And then you have an expert like Kourtney go over it with you. So some things were surprising to me. Just to let you know, I'm not really having lots of symptoms. Kourtney's going to kind of maybe lead me that way and ask me some questions. I'm feeling great overall. This is just another tool, especially if you're having some kind of symptoms or problems, that this may help to get to the bottom of it. So Kourtney, go.
Exactly. And a lot of times too, one big thing I see with this a lot is thyroid. So, when some people, and this is not even Shawn's test, this is just in general, when I'm working with people and I see, basically what we're looking at levels of minerals, and we're looking at percentages of minerals. And the percentages is where you really want to hone in on, because the percentages are indicative of certain conditions that may or may not be happening. And like Shawn said, it might not be something that he's actually experiencing, just like it might be where you go to your doctor and all of your thyroid, you get a whole panel of thyroid, blood work done, and everything's fine. This test isn't saying if your thyroid percentage is off, the minerals that are affected by your thyroid function, it doesn't mean go run to your doctor and get a prescription. It means, hey, let's take a picture of what's going on in your body, and maybe we can change some nutrition around, or maybe by increasing one mineral we can kind of balance out the other, which is pretty cool.
So it's down to prevention on your level and every day
kind of thing. So small things move big things over time. So prevention of something before it ever shows up.
Exactly, which is so important. And then even on top of that, looking at something, and is it something that's a little bit off? Can we change it with nutrition? Or is it something that's, whoa, that's really out of range? Let's try supplementing for maybe a couple of months and then maybe revisiting a test. I always recommend that people revisit a test, maybe possibly 6 months after the first test results. So what you're looking at also, remember now, we're looking at what was going on for the past maybe like 2.5 months of what was going on in your life.
That's the purpose of the hair, right?
Exactly. So, you're waiting to grow out that root, and you want to make sure when you're getting this test done that it's a fresh root. If you're getting your hair colored or any kind of treatment, you want to make sure it's a fresh virgin root where there's nothing on it, at least a 1/2 inch, so that when the lab processes it, there's nothing that can interfere with it, which is pretty cool. So, you're looking at that time frame. So sometimes when people, come and they're looking at results, they might say, well, no, I don't feel that so much anymore, but I did feel that way maybe like a month ago or a couple months ago, or I had a really stressful thing going on in my life, X amount of months ago. I was going through, the death of a parent, or, somebody sick, or them themselves being sick. And then, kind of saying, well, that makes sense. And maybe you were feeling better, or maybe it's, hey, a lot of times when I read these results, people will look at me and be like, we'll be on a Zoom video and they'll be like, are you a witch? Like, I'll describe them to a T. Like, they'll be looking at me as I'm reading it, and they're like, what? Are you? Okay. Like, we didn't have this discussion before, did we? So I always find that funny, because it's really cool when you do a test and you take a part of your body and send it to a lab, and then you literally somebody can say, are you feeling this way? And you're like, yeah, absolutely. Right. It's a pretty cool thing to say, hey, I'm not imagining this. That's exactly the way that I feel. And it's like, the results don't lie. So it's really cool what I have seen with so many, with patients going over them. So, what I usually do when I'm going over them with like looking at the minerals themselves is, right here, I did your levels right here. So I wrote down, your levels are the ones that are printed out there, and then down the bottom are the ones that are like, what is the ideal number? And then anything that's out of that ideal range to a certain aspect, I did make some notes to say this could potentially be going on. So, some of your things this is the normal range right here. So even for everybody looking, when you look at the graph, you can see like there's a middle range here. So you see like low, middle, and high, and that's on minerals themselves, and there's also the ratios. So your calcium levels. Your calcium levels are at 19, ideal is 42. And they say anything below 40 can be a deficiency. So not necessarily your calcium depleted, this is the calcium in your soft tissue. So it's kind of like when we get to that ratios is why it really matters when we're talking ratios, because just because these things say a certain thing, this is just what's going on in your soft tissue. When we get to the ratios, all these ratios have a meaning of what it's indicative of. And usually when I read those descriptions, that's when people say, yeah, hey, that does sound a little bit like me. Or maybe if I read 7 symptoms, you might say, hey, 4 or 5 of them sound like me. So this is kind of where it's at when it comes to like results, and where I work on with people with whether it be supplementing or nutrition based on those values, which is pretty cool. And do you have well water?
Yes.
Okay. And we'll get there too. So that was, I think that's on the one ratio I have it written down. So we'll get there in a second. Your magnesium levels were also low. So we are looking at, you are at a 1.4, and 6 is ideal. And then anything, really anything that they say is below 5 can indicate a deficiency. So you're like right on the mark of normal and low. But again, this is what's in your soft tissue, not what's really going on at the cellular level. So it's not saying that you could be depleted, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to take a magnesium supplement. Your sodium levels. So you're at a 20, ideal is 25, and anything below 20, they say could be significant of dehydration. So something to maybe think about, that you're staying hydrated if it sounds like, that's you, something to kind of think about, during the day. Are you getting enough water in it, especially based on you're very active. So, and even you had this done summer months, maybe even sweating more summer months,
Right.
outside workouts, that kind of thing. So again, if we looked at that number now, could it potentially be different? Absolutely. Your potassium level is a little bit, you're at a 5, and ideal is a 10. So anything, really, you're kind of like in the range of like below a 6, which you're a 5, it could be a deficiency, it could be low thyroid function, it could be a possible copper toxicity, and it could even be an iodine deficiency. So again, not, oh my gosh, let's go run and get these tests done. Let's check out the ratios and see if there's something else that's affecting it, and then based on what your symptoms are. And then you are pretty much in a good range for copper. Your ideal is 2.2 and you're at 1.8, so that can indicate a deficiency. And then most of them are in the normal range except for the manganese, which as you can see is significantly elevated. You are at a 296 and it's 0.07 is a normal number, but that is actually could be because of your well water. That's
Right.
something that they definitely, usually I can tell when somebody has that level is high on somebody, I'll ask them if they have well water, and right off the bat it's like yes, and it's like okay, that makes sense. So and then this is our toxic elements, our heavy metal toxicity. So if you see, you're still kind of in the normal reference range. You're not in the high level yet, but you're definitely out of the low range. For uranium, is there anything that you would indicate or say possibly that could be a reason why that would be elevated?
Well, that was interesting because the only thing I can think of is that we are close to the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. There's obviously very, very trace amounts of it. So any kind of trace amount that shows up is going to look high, probably.
Exactly.
So it's hard to say. I mean, the only thing I can attribute it to would be if it was contamination, would be from Hanford Nuclear Reservation. I don't know. Where would uranium come from?
And it can come from other things. So sometimes it's not the uranium that's like the radioactive uranium.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just from like, hey, are you eating a lot of root vegetables? Like it can come from other sources as well.
It's in the ground.
It's in the ground. Yes, exactly. And like you said, there's trace amounts of these. So even if you were up here in this level, like you're still kind of almost in the safe zone, like almost kind of, hey, take it as a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But you might even see when you start balancing these out, sometimes you see that some of these other things that are just like randomly out of whack, that ones that aren't really significant of anything, your body just came up. Like a lot of times I see boron doesn't register for people. For some reason, it just doesn't. Most of the time, it's not applicable. I don't know why, and I actually should reach out to the PhD who works at the company. He's very helpful when we have questions for like clinical questions of like, hey, but I noticed that on a lot of my tests that I run that it's I don't know if it's just there's such small amounts, they're just not coming up on the test. Yeah, exactly. So just a thought. But basically, that's where you're at kind of with this zone. Everything is kind of in, everything else is kind of in the middle of the normal range. You have a couple that are in the lower, but nothing's significantly off other than, the manganese, which, well, water, again, but again, by balancing out some of those other minerals, it can kind of change things around a bit. So, this is where the interesting part comes in. When we start to look at ratios. So these ratios all are kind of significant of something in the body. And again, now when we're looking at them, it kind of measures your different hormone levels. So not just your sex hormones, your adrenal function, your blood glucose, your adrenals, did I say adrenals, thyroid, sex hormones, and your insulin. So by looking at these and like your vitality ratio, which is kind of tied in with your adrenal function, but basically what you're looking at is these ratios all significant of something, and this is where you may or may not see different side effects. So this is where I'm interested to see your response. If when I ask you if you're going to be like, all right, like really dig deep, really think about it.
Jen, do you have any questions?
Yeah, no,
comments,
I'm just listening to this, but I'm clearly thinking Shawn's been dehydrated many times with his workouts, so he's not hydrating enough while he's exercising during his ride. So I see this picture from afar.
No, but you would be the first person to see it, exactly, because and that makes total sense. It just and just knowing his extreme sports that I watch on Facebook and his very active sports life, yes. So if he's not keeping hydrated, yes, it makes sense, right? So that's something to definitely mental note, increase hydration. So these ratios, they're all indicative of things. So the first one is your calcium phosphorus ratio. So ideal is 2.6 and you're at a 1.12. So this ratio is your autonomic ratio, which basically identifies the dominance of the nervous system. So it's sympathetic or parasympathetic dominance. So anything that is below a 1.6, you're at a 1.12, it indicates sympathetic dominance. So when it's low, it indicates that the body's in a chronic fight or flight state, and it could be an overactive metabolism. You could be anxious, irritable. Is he irritable? I don't think he seems irritable.
No.
He's not, but he's anxious.
No, I'm not.
Sometimes you are.
I love this. This is great.
I could see the chronic fight or flight being
Yes.
just that I train a lot.
Yes.
Yes.
That's going to increase my sympathetic response.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense, right? And it could cause loose stools, oily skin, oily hair. So you don't have to tell the camera if you don't want to talk. I mean, it's
All good there. Oily skin.
You're
Oily skin, probably, but I've always had oily skin.
Okay, so just in general, there are things that you might see. And again, some people look and say, gosh, that's me to a T. Sometimes they say not. You're also not, you're like right on the cusp of, of right there.
Right.
So it's not like, there's some people that are extreme. I should break out my levels from last October. You'll be scared. I think my one ratio was like 20 something. It was pretty bad. But that was a very stressful time. I'll say, I'm going to redo mine. I'm going to get mine redone, I think. But next time I go get my hair done, I'm going to make her cut my hair. You're making me want to get it done again. Next ratio is your sodium and your potassium ratio. So ideal, again, is 2.6 and you're at a 4. So you're a little bit elevated. You're out of the acceptable zone into the high zone. And basically anything above ideal is 2.6, but anything above a 3.4 indicates an acute phase of stress, intense anger.
Oh my gosh, intense
anger
and emotional outbursts.
What?
What?
Oh yeah, it's okay. It's gonna be okay. Asthma, allergies, kidney and liver issues, and inflammation. Obviously, you've got inflammation, right? Because I mean,
Right.
you're tough on your body. Like you work it, so that's got to be one. I mean, I'm just surmising.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can tell you, and that's why it's so important to know your body and to get a wide range of lab tests, but also know how to interpret them appropriately. Because I've had a CRP done, and my CRP is really low. So, based on that, my inflammation is low. But
That's good.
So
Yeah.
that's why it's important to get an overall picture. You can't base any, in my opinion, although we do it in Western medicine all the time, you can't base a diagnosis on one lab test.
Absolutely not.
And when we talk about insulin, I'll talk about that a little bit.
No, but I do think one thing, especially for someone like Shawn that trains a lot, when you start getting into the place where inflammation is high, it probably means either you've trained too long, or we need a break, or we need to pay attention to some of the signals that are happening, because when you have intense training for a long period of time, you hit a point where your body says no more.
Absolutely. And we actually just discussed this, and I apologize for my appearance. Actually, I came from a live workout this morning on a YouTube channel, and we were actually discussing that. It was about, sometimes, doing that crazy cardio every day and you think you're doing good for your body. Sometimes you're putting more oxidative stress, you're putting more stress on your adrenals, and you're actually stressing your body out. You're not doing good for your body. You can actually be doing harm. If your body's wiped out and you're tired, you need to give your body a rest sometimes and say, okay, there's other workouts where maybe we can just have a recoup day and do something that's more gentle on the body.
Recovery is when we get stronger, not when we work out.
Exactly, absolutely. So, so another thing too, your sodium ratio, we talked about your sodium being low, so that could be throwing your ratio off as well. And then when they start talking about like kidney and liver issues, so, could it be if you're dehydrated, could you be forming kidney stones, something like that. So again, they're looking at a big picture. Again, this test is not a diagnostic and it's not the end all be all, but sometimes it just points to different things that could possibly be. I know one time I was going over this test with a very healthy 40-something-year-old, and when I was reading the results and I went through them, and I'm like, you don't have any kidney or liver. It says kidney, liver, but you don't have that. Like, I kind of blew through it, and she was like, well, wait a second. So we share a client, me and my one friend is a massage therapist, and she said every time that she massages me, she always says, I feel crunchy around my kidneys. So I don't know if that's something where it could potentially be that she's having stones or something that's maybe in the future, but she said, actually I do. So it was kind of weird when I pointed it out that her level was off there, that, that there could possibly be something going on. Again, not diagnostic, as pharmacists we stay in our lanes, but if there's ever something that's a red flag to say, hey, maybe we should revisit this and take a little bit more into, further testing. But again, I would imagine that level for you would be off because of your sodium level being so low, and just kind of replacing it with hydration, and I bet you that would balance itself out. So your next one is your calcium and your potassium ratio. So you are at a 3.8, ideal is 4.2. So you're kind of like really right in that middle range. They say anything above a 6.2, which you're not, indicates sluggish thyroid activity. So that's basically your thyroid, what your thyroid is doing. So again, you're right smack in the middle of being normal. So no issues there at all. Your zinc and copper ratio is a 10, and ideal is an 8. And you're kind of, again, right in the middle, where they're not really discussing anything that could be off per se, in a large amount, but it's your hormone ratio. So it's zinc's associated with testosterone and progesterone, and copper with estrogen. So you're kind of like right in the perfect range, actually.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Good.
Yay.
Considering we compound hormones, I hope so.
I was just gonna say, like, you guys are like the hormone experts, so yeah. So next one is your sodium and magnesium, and ideal is 4. You are at a 14.29. This is your adrenal ratio. So sodium and magnesium levels are directly associated with adrenal gland function. So they say anything that above a 6 indicates excessive adrenal activity. And so it's associated with inflammation, increased stamina, aggressiveness, impulsivity, hypertension, high blood sugar, and a type A personality.
Okay.
There you go.
That one might be right. Okay.
She nailed that one.
So that one's kind of like, and that's one that you're significant, like you're significantly, there's a difference there. So we'll get to that in a second. So your calcium and your magnesium level is at a 13.57, ideal is 7. So anything above an 11 indicates imbalanced glucose metabolism, and it's associated with a tendency for hypoglycemia, low blood sugar issues. Do you have anything at all like that?
No.
That you know, like never?
No.
That's not true, because sometimes when you are exercising, you will reach that low point, because that's happened to you.
Yeah,
Just
post-workout if I don't
So
fuel right.
recovery is where his fueling has to be, to make sure that doesn't happen to him, because when he gets to the house and he's like,
No, because he's
Yeah.
burned it off. We know
Right.
he's, yes, absolutely. Absolutely, and that makes sense. And I love that you guys are doing this together because sometimes things that you don't notice, like I'm hydrated, I'm fine, and I'm like, oh wait, hold up, hold the phone. But no, I think that's great because some of those things are things that you don't realize, oh no, I'm fine. But you notice that there's a difference there, which is pretty awesome. So I like that we're going over this together. It's awesome. And then you were, so it is, it's your blood sugar ratio. So calcium is required for the release of insulin and magnesium inhibits insulin secretion. So this is kind of even the whole, you could talk about this for 4 hours with like insulin resistance and all of that good stuff, and what your body does when you're doing, putting it in different states of, with your nutrition and yeah, we could talk about that. We could talk about that all day. And then your iron and copper ratio is 0.56 and 0.9 is normal. So you are in the normal range. And basically this is like an indicative of like an infection. So a lot of times I'll see this with especially with COVID or flu season. Sometimes you'll see people, if they had it actually a couple months ago, it might be out of whack a little bit. They might be fine at this point, but it's oh yeah, I had that, or even had a vaccination in that time frame 2-3 months ago. Sometimes I'll see that off there and, which makes sense. Their immune system compromised, just kind of fighting it off and doing its thing. So your toxic ratios were all in the acceptable range, and your copper and magnesium is actually right on point. It's a 600 and 625 is ideal on that end. So these are the different. Before we give the treatments. So URA, this test also tells what kind of metabolizer you are. So again, based on that one ratio being sympathetic dominant, you are a fast metabolizer type 1. So basically fast metabolism, you're usually under stress and function best under stress due to the body's response of increasing energy production when confronted by a stressor. So that makes sense, especially just knowing your workout and how you're just a beast. You do all kinds of crazy fun things just because you're you. And John shakes her head and is like,
So true.
You're you're not lying. So often fast metabolizers will eat frequently in order to maintain their energy levels, and it may result in weight gain in the abdominal region. But fast metabolizers may result in warm body temperatures, moist skin, and a tendency to perspire easily, which, if that's true, that could also be a hydration thing as well.
Why the sodium is low, right?
Exactly, kind of all ties in together, right? Not necessarily, but it's a thing. It could be a thing. So some of these are ideas of what can we do to fix your levels. So your calcium levels are low based on normal levels. But again, this is in your soft tissue. So it's not saying that they're low and, oh my gosh, it's not in your bone where it needs to be.
Yeah.
It could potentially be, depending on the age of the person that I'm working with, especially if it's an older female. I might say, hey, maybe, have you gotten a bone density test, something like that, where are you making sure that you're, taking a calcium supplement if their calcium levels are low, depending on, if they've actually gotten labs done from their doctor or anything. But these are actually some of the symptoms that we just talked about too, if you have the low levels of calcium. And again, this is in your soft tissue, not in your bones. So things that can contribute to a low hair tissue mineral analysis calcium level: increased thyroid activity, increased adrenal activity, which we kind of said that you have, hypoparathyroid activity, which we kind of said we think your thyroid's going pretty good. Deficiency of vitamin D. Have you had a vitamin D level checked recently?
Not lately, but I know where I'm sit.
That's good. I'm sure you take a daily. Do you take a daily?
Yes.
Okay, excessive levels or intake of vitamin A, excessive phosphorus retention, a copper deficiency, which we didn't see a deficiency, but we saw kind of a little bit on the lower to normal end range, toxic metal accumulation, and an inadequate calcium intake. So they're the things that could kind of throw off your calcium levels. Insomnia, how are you with sleep? That's great.
I sleep great in general.
That's amazing.
I probably have insomnia once a year, maybe.
Once a year?
Not even that, usually.
It's not fair.
It's not fair.
I sleep good.
I used to sleep good. I don't know. The past few months I've not been at my best, but I will say that it's crucial for everything. I just did my morning affirmation on my YouTube channel, and it was on sleep hygiene and really, what to do to get those good night's sleeps, how to prepare your body for it. So, it's saying you could potentially have a problem be okay falling asleep, but maybe waking up throughout the night. But you seem to be good. But they're basically associating that with your magnesium levels being low. And again, where are your magnesium levels at the cellular level? We're looking at them in your tissue, but if you're feeling good all around and you have energy and all of these things that you're feeling pretty well, your magnesium levels are, could be potentially fine at the cellular level, but it's never a bad idea to take a magnesium supplement. If I had a name, like my top 5, I think that you'd be on the same page with me. Magnesium is one that I would say, you can't get too much of that. It's good for so many things. And then your manganese level that we said that was higher based on the well water. Anything? Do you get headaches at all? Any kind of dizziness, hyperactivity?
No.
Nothing.
No, I don't think so. I mean, he just is a busy person in general from day one. So.
Yes, so no, absolutely. And that is, like I said, again, those levels, like trace amounts, like where we were looking at it. But they just mention it just to kind of throw it out there. But it says when it's found high in the hair tissue, it's frequently elevated along with iron or aluminum, which I wrote nope in my notes because you were not. I checked your iron levels, like everything, your aluminum, everything was on target. So again, that could just be showing. Could it have been, just excess at that time? Is it something, if you revisit it again, would it be, the same? Again, you could always revisit it again in another 6 months and do another one to check and see, where you're at. If, anything changes, if you decide to do some of the supplements that I would recommend. And again, they talk about definitely the levels of high manganese, where it could come from. And it's just saying, a lot of it is the outside factors, which again, well water. And then they give you some herbal sources of manganese that you can take: peppermint, chickweed, golden seal, comfrey, black cohosh. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
So this is another one that I didn't even mention earlier that I took with a grain of salt. Your I don't even know how to say it. Vanadium?
Vanadium?
How do you say vanadium level? So basically it was above the normal reference range, but it is antagonistic to the sulfur amino acids, cysteine, and methionine. So I don't know, it's basically, they talk about it being in decreased hormone production, but there are things that you don't have issues with. So I kind of just left that aside because I thought that it was the level to be taken with a grain of salt, trace amounts, but knowing that you're feeling okay in those areas, I would say, something to just kind of, keep it in your back pocket, but not really address. And then these are all of the ratios that we went over. So it's a nice report that breaks down basically which one what each one means and what you can basically do, what you might be feeling. And then all of your toxic metal ratios are all within a normal acceptable range. And then there are some tips in here too. So, we can go over dietary suggestions. So it gives you a nice report when you take this test, and it gives you ideas of what to do when you're like the fast metabolizer.
That's cool.
So so it kind of, whether it will give you tips like increase your intake of high purine protein foods, increase intake of milk and milk products, reduce carbohydrate intake. And then it's going to talk about the foods that you want to either add or avoid based on the levels that you were high or low in. So some of the things that would stimulate histamine, which I guess they considered the one thing high allergy or whatever.
For allergies, yeah.
Exactly. So if you are experiencing any of that, they are things that you would want to avoid. And then here's things that they're saying. So dietary considerations. Foods that are high in phosphorus and may contribute to even a further calcium deficiency. Things to avoid are cola drinks. I was just gonna say, you better stop drinking all that soda.
You gotta limit yourself.
Yeah, I do drink soda. That is my vice.
Is it your
like
vice?
soda.
Is it? Phosphate preservatives and then sodium phosphate found in baking powder. Looks like donuts, cake mixes, treats, that sort of thing. So, by cutting back on those, essentially affecting your calcium levels. And foods that are high in magnesium. So whether you're going to take a magnesium supplement or like me and Janet were discussing, a magnesium foot bath is a fantastic thing for people that don't know to get magnesium at the cellular level. It's best to be taken in a topical liquid form, a foot bath. And but if not, you can get it from nutrition. You can get it from, I always recommend a reactive magnesium that mimics your body's it mimics the magnesium that your body naturally produces, creates less GI upset. So foods that basically are high in magnesium that you might want to consider adding into your diet. So they give you a nice little report there. And then so they're telling you things that you might want to increase in your diet are here. And then things that could improve calcium absorption. So some things you might want to avoid there. And then, just
peanut butter.
Yeah, I eat a lot of it though. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can eat more. I get to eat more dairy too.
I love cheese. So basically, in conclusion, again, your heavy metals, they were all in the normal range. So
except uranium, right?
Except for uranium. Yeah. But again, not still to be taken kind of with like a grain of salt, but interesting to see, where it could potentially be coming from, and if you were to kind of balance other things out, could it potentially go away and go down?
It'd be interesting to see if you just repeated the test and the next time, 6 months from now, I'd change nothing and it just goes away. So there might have been some kind of contamination one time. I don't know.
Absolutely.
However, I want to speak to the histamines because we live in a very agricultural community.
Ooh, that's
and
interesting.
Where we ride, we are exposed to a lot of different pollens, we grow a lot of hay. Shawn has allergies to different environmental things out there. So it may not be so much diet, it could be just what he's exposed to. Not that he needs to stop, but just the fact that it's there while he is in his environment working out. Because when we started hitting histamines, I'm like, oh.
Allergies.
No, you're absolutely right. And it did say that under the one section. I forget what section it did say, potential allergies. And it was like seasonal allergies for the one imbalance that you had. But the interesting thing about that, it's funny you should say that, because I did a test on a client once that was a wheat and gluten sensitivity test. And this person was gluten-free and they were still reacting and they couldn't figure out why they were reacting. Well, here they found out after all this testing, figuring it out, they were having their basement redone. And the wallboard in their basement was actually a wheat-based wallboard. And they were flaring up so bad and they couldn't figure out why. This gluten-free person that was meticulous with their diet, and they were literally breathing it in from their environment and didn't even know. It took them a little while to figure that out. But it was pretty cool to actually see that was flaring somebody up. So pretty cool. And then what's nice about these reports too is that we can kind of get an idea of what to do to move forward. Obviously, we've got the nutrition, so there's ideas, tips, and tricks, but there's things that if you kind of want to move it along faster. Now, you're somebody who's feeling pretty good. So you're, if there's something that you are looking at where you're like, oh, maybe I could feel better by doing, by doing supplements versus nutrition, or maybe adding in a little bit of both. A lot of times what I see with people too, especially when their minerals are, like yours were kind of, in the lower, most of your things were in the lower range of normal. So not that they were abnormal, but they were in the lower range. So your body just might not be absorbing them properly for maximum benefit. And you still might be feeling good. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're sick or something's wrong, but it could potentially be that you're not absorbing them. A lot of times, and I know we've had this on a podcast before, where people don't understand that we need stomach acid to break down our food. So we, right away run and get, those proton pump inhibitors and decrease, your acid reflux, in turn decrease your stomach acid, and then set off a plethora of mineral imbalance and all kinds of crazy things in the body. So sometimes absorption is a big thing too. So a lot of times I recommend people adding on digestive enzymes and possibly like a hydrochloric acid with like betaine and peptase, where they're actually just giving themselves some digestive support. And it's not always a long-term thing, but if it's something that if they are also experiencing some gut stuff, because sometimes when people come to me, they will be feeling, we kind of did this as more of like hey, let's do a test, do it for fun and see, and do it on a podcast, where there's people that are actually that come with, XYZ problems, and how are we going to solve them? So sometimes a lot of GI issues come up, and I will start people a lot on digestive enzymes, and they're basically what our body produces, amylase, lipase, protease, and it's just giving our body more of that to just help metabolize. You're a fast metabolizer, so usually when people are slow metabolizers, I will help add that onto them. And a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, people feel better within a couple of weeks. They'll report back to me saying, oh my gosh, I don't feel, whether it be gassy, bloating, diarrhea, whatever it was that they're feeling, in combination with a really good probiotic, they feel like they're feeling better. So again, hey, doing that metabolism, giving that better absorption, is it something that, would overall make your minerals absorb better, go to where they need to go, and, and whatnot.
It's all about gut health. We know that gut health is so important when it comes to everything. Our immune system, absorbing our nutrients from minerals, vitamins, nutrients from our food, very important.
Absolutely. So a lot of times these tests, are indicative of that, and whether it be, we see it with blood glucose levels, and that's, I probably even why coming up on a report for you because of that. But again, when Janet said, your blood glucose levels appeared that they come down, we know that that's not just, hey, a mineral imbalance, it's also more of like we know that maybe it is a mineral imbalance, but it's in direct correlation to your workouts. So again, making sure that you're fueling yourself with enough before your workout so that you get through and you're not feeling that, and then again for the recovery period, making sure that you're, replenishing yourself afterwards, staying hydrated, all of that good stuff. And then obviously the things that we saw that were a little bit low, just even adding some magnesium, chromium, great for metabolism, and copper, just because it was on the low end. Copper can do some funky stuff. Usually that copper, if your zinc levels copper and zinc are directly correlated with each other. So usually if they are out of whack, one or the other helps balance. So you were kind of like in the middle range with that. There was a couple things that pointed that you could have possibly needed a copper supplement, but I don't know. I would say if I were to pick, I would say, maybe start some of the others, and then a B complex is always good too. Again, that's one of the top 5 that,
Yep.
B vitamins are just amazing to take anyway. So, and then just the metabolic support, and that's, overall things that you might want to consider adding. But again, like you said, you're feeling good, and anything that and even that Janet commented on and said, these are the things that I noticed, you kind of pointed them out, and it's all in relation to something, not just like, hey, why am I feeling like that? Right. Why. If I'm not hydrating, if I'm not eating enough before or after a workout. So that is the hair tissue mineral analysis.
Wow, that was intense.
I'm telling you, right?
I know, but it was very truthful too, because what I saw with and he may not realize this, but I see him after a workout or a ride, and he's like, I need to get some food in me, like right now. Like right now. And I'm like, there you go. And the dehydration, I'm thirsty right now. And that's really something that needs to be tied in. And the other thing too that I found very supportive of what Shawn's coach says is, I want you to take this time off between this window, because then we're going to ramp it up again. So basically what it's saying is, pay attention to your coach when he says, I want you to
Recover.
And so it laid it out for Shawn.
She's like, what's that? What's taking a break? Come on.
Like, I can't do that. And I'm like, yes, you have to.
No, it's so important. It is. Like I said, and we talked about it this morning while we were working out. It is so important to do for your body. And I also, like I said, I love that we're doing this together, because, you know, you're kind of picking up what what he's not. So if Shawn's like, no, I'm fine. You're like, no, this is the way it is. He's going to be like stubborn, and he's like, no, I'm fine with my workouts. And you're like, really? Your coach doesn't say that either.
Yeah, Jason's going to say, yes, Janet.
This is very helpful. This is another tool that we can use to just work our way towards optimal health. So I appreciate it, Kourtney. As always, you're a rock star when it comes to this stuff. Janet, what are your comments before we finish this podcast up?
Well, I'm super excited. I'm going to do mine now, because we were talking about cramping in the feet and things like that. So certainly this is very helpful. I think just from a tool, like Shawn said, of how to approach something and point out what you're doing right in your everyday or not, or just remembering that it's a snapshot in that time. So like you said, is there something going on? If that evens out over time, then maybe I don't need to address it in a big way, but maybe just slightly.
Absolutely. And I actually want to redo mine. I did mine around this time last year. I think it was last October I did mine, and I couldn't have been at a more stressful time in my life. It was in the mayhem of COVID shots, when I used to like literally walk in the door and collapse. It was literally, the pharmacy was a banana bonkers explosion every day. It was like putting out fires, and I'll show you my levels when we go off camera. You'll laugh. And then I'm going to retest, and then I'm going to look and see, because some of my levels were, my adrenal function was just off the charts. Like, it was crazy. So I'd be curious to see. I really should have retested, 6 months later, but I'm going to do it too. So we'll do it together. We'll have our results together.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, thank you, listeners and viewers, for tuning in today. We really appreciate you. Tune into our podcast every Monday at 12:30 to 1:30 Pacific Standard Time, as we try to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. And I think Kourtney helped us do that today. So thank you so much, Kourtney.
You're very welcome. Thank you guys for coming and being here. I'm glad we're visiting in person from all the way across the country.
I know. Super cool to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.